You're listening to Sort of Spiritual. Not too long ago, I never would have called myself a spiritual person. But in the past few years, I've gone from being broke, sick all the time, feeling trapped in a job that made me miserable, to easily building a 6-figure business, finding the most incredible partner, and creating the freedom to live my life. And along the way, it looks like I've become sort of spiritual. In this podcast, I'm going to bring you the most impactful tools and lessons I've found for personal and spiritual growth. In Season 1, we're diving into human design, my favorite tool for self-awareness, easy alignment, and the catalyst behind my massive life upgrade. I'm so grateful you've chosen to join me on this journey. Let's get into it. Oh my goodness, hello. Welcome to episode number 4. I didn't think I was going to get into the centers until much later in the series, but the centers had such an impact on how I understood human design. When you understand the centers, you can understand the types better because some of the types are so closely tied to the centers that make them up. And when I started going through the emotional solar plexus episode, which will be the next episode, episode 5, I knew that I had to talk about all of the centers first before we did a deep dive there. So here we are talking about the centers today, and this is where human design really started to blow my mind. I felt like when I learned about the centers and looked at myself, like they were reading my soul. And I know I probably say this about so many things with human design. I'm rather enthusiastic about the topic, you may have noticed, but the centers really helped me to understand myself and other people so easily just by looking at the body graph once I really learned the centers. So today I'm going to talk about the centers, what they mean, what it means when they're colored in or when they're white, and I'm going to do a brief rundown of all of the centers. I'll try not to talk too much because I could probably talk for at least an hour about each center, but I'll do my best to keep it brief while giving you a decent understanding of what the centers do. It will be really helpful as you're listening to this episode for you to have your own human design body graph to reference. So if you don't already, go to mybodygraph.com, enter in your details, get your free body graph. I'm not affiliated with this website, but I just find it's an easy one to start with. I will also have a cheat sheet for you for this episode. So if you want to see visuals, that will be helpful for you. If you go to sortofspiritual.com/centers, you can get the cheat sheet there. And I'm also going to try and add custom artwork for this episode that will have a little diagram of the centers with the names to make it easy to see as you're listening what I'm talking about. But as you can see, this is only my 4th episode. I haven't done this before, so I'm not 100% confident that it will show up or work on all platforms. So hopefully you'll be seeing custom artwork now. And without further ado, let's get into the episode. Okay, so new on my human design journey, I was Googling things like, what are these shapes? The shapes on the body graph are called centers, and there are 9 of them. Most human design charts will have some combination of colored in or white shapes. Some charts are going to be all white, and that would mean that it's a reflector chart, and some charts will actually have all of the centers colored in, which is fairly uncommon, but definitely happens. And when the shapes or centers are colored in, we say that they're defined. And when they're white, we say that they're either open or undefined. For the purpose of this episode, I'm going to be referring to open and undefined centers pretty interchangeably. A lot of people do this, although there is a slight difference. So when you're looking at the centers, you'll notice that there's numbers on the centers, and these numbers are gates. And you'll see on your centers that some of the numbers will be colored in with little lines shooting off the centers, and some of the numbers won't have anything colored in on them. So if you have a completely open center, this will be a white center with no gates colored in at all. Whereas if you have an undefined center, at least one gate will be colored in, but the center itself will still be white. And so there are differences in the sense that a completely open center, they have no consistent way of filtering that energy, but I'm not really going to go into it. It doesn't make a huge difference. So to make things easy for today, I'm going to be talking about open and undefined centers interchangeably. I did a whole series on centers on my Instagram, which is at sort.of.spiritual. So if you go to my Instagram and head to the guides section, or if you just scroll back, you'll see a bunch of posts that just say all of the center names on them. And so you can go there if you want to learn a little bit more about how the center is undefined versus open. Another thing to note when we start is that you can't have a center defined if it's not connected to another center. So between centers, when they're colored in, you'll see two gates connect and they'll form a channel. You'll also notice when you look at the centers, they might have different colors. So depending on what software you use, the colors are usually red, yellow, green, and brown, depending on the center. So for example, the sacral center is always going to be red. The mind center is always going to be green. As far as I've been taught, the colors in the human design chart don't actually mean anything. What is important is if they are colored in or not. The colors were just transmitted as they were transmitted. However, if you've received some download of your own, definitely send me a DM because I would be so interested to hear different takes on that. So what are the differences then between a center that's defined or open? A defined center has at least one gate defined and connects to another gate in a channel. So the minimum defined centers in a chart, whenever there is definition in a chart, meaning that it's not a reflector, is 2 centers because centers need to be connected to another center. Defined centers are a consistent source of energy for you, and you radiate that energy out to other people. You likely are going to have a more consistent experience of this energy. And usually in human design, when we talk about conditioning, we're talking about the open areas or the white areas of our chart. But I definitely see in the work that I've done that many of us also have conditioning in our defined centers as well. This often looks like having too much of an energy though, or thinking that we have too much. So for example, if you have the emotional solar plexus defined, you might have this feeling or this conditioning that you're too emotional. That definitely used to be me. And now that I've cleared most of that conditioning anyways, I can see that my emotional energy is really a strength and a gift. For undefined centers, you have a lot of flexibility and variability in how you take in the energy of that center. So you can experience a huge range of energy in that center, but for generally shorter periods of time. So it might mean your head is just like exploding with all these ideas, or you're feeling really intense emotions, or you have all of this sacral energy to get work done, but it's not sustainable or reliable for you. And this is also why you're more likely to have conditioning in your open centers, because you're constantly taking in energy here from other people that isn't yours, as well as energy from planetary transits, and even things like animals and plants. Conditioning in your open centers tends to feel like we're not enough of something. So if we have an open sacral, we might feel like we don't have enough energy, let's say. And if you have a completely open center that has no gate activations, they share a lot of similarities to the undefined centers, but because there's no gate activation, we have no familiar way of accessing the energy. And sometimes our experience of that energy can just be confusing. But there's also a massive potential for wisdom here with our open centers, just like there is in our undefined centers. Okay, so let's get into each of the centers now, starting at the top of the body graph. You're going to notice that some centers have more than one name. So I'll share them with you now, as well as on the cheat sheet. It'll be a lot easier, like I said, if you have something to look at. So hopefully this episode graphic worked out okay. So from the very top, you have the crown center or the head center. And then directly below that, you have the mind center or the ajna center. That's the triangle pointing down. Below that, we have the throat center, which is the square right where your throat is. Below that, we have a diamond shape, which is the G center, also called the self center or the identity center. And directly below that, we have the sacral center, another square shape. And at the very bottom, we have the root center, which is also another square. And then you'll see 2 triangles, one on the left, one on the right, pointing inwards. So the one on the left is the spleen, and the triangle that points inward on the right is the emotional solar plexus center. And then above that, between the G center and the emotional solar plexus on the right side is a smaller triangle that is called the heart center, or it's also called the will center or the ego center. So I'm going to go through the themes for each of the centers, give you an idea of how the challenges or the conditioning can show up. I'll talk about what it's like having the center defined or what it's like having the center open, as well as the wisdom of the center. So keep an ear out for when we're going through this to see what themes you might relate to for your centers. And of course, I'll include these notes with the cheat sheet, which you can get at sortofspiritual.com/centers. So from the very top, the head or the crown. The head is a center for ideas and inspiration and mental pressure. It's meant to be filled with questions, not answers. Most people have this center open because there's only 3 potential gate activations here, so we're less likely to have the center defined because there's less possibilities or there's less chances for it to be connected. The pressure from the head center is here to help us make sense of the world and to help us seek answers and ask questions. And our task here is really to release our mind from running our life and let it focus on what's important to us and what's important to humanity as a whole. About 30% of the population have this center defined. So if you have a defined head center, you're in the minority here. And there's consistent pressure to ask and answer questions, and also this pressure to kind of know the unknowable. It wants to know everything. Due to the mental pressure that you're under and with all of your inspiration, there's often pressure to realize or to create your ideas in real life, in reality. And this often can lead to fast action or sort of haphazard action, which then creates haphazard results, and often then anxiety or self-doubt, when really it's not that you have any reason to doubt yourself, you're just taking action at the wrong time or maybe for the wrong thing, so you don't get the results that you want to get. And a big lesson with the head center is that you are not meant to manifest your thoughts directly. Thoughts are meant to be thought. Enjoy the thought. You are here to be a force of inspiration on our planet, but that doesn't mean you have to do all of the ideas or inspiring thoughts that you have. Your strategy and authority will let you know what inspiration and what ideas are meant for you to bring into the world and when it's the right time to do them. The head is really about engaging in possibility, asking questions, and letting the answers just come to you. You know when you have a problem or you have a thought and you just put it on the back burner and you go out for a walk or maybe you're playing around and then the answer or solution just comes to you. That's how it works with the head center. It's not about forcing a solution. I often have an analogy here that I talk about a turtle, where it's like if the solution is the turtle coming out of its shell, you can't force the turtle to come out of its shell. It's like you're slamming on the ground around the turtle to get it to come out of its shell, and like you're yelling at it to come out. It's not going to come out. And so it's really about not forcing and allowing the answers to come instead. Your energy will also put pressure on open heads to think. You broadcast your thoughts and your ideas and inspiration to people around you. So if you have the open or undefined head center, there is a big theme here of feeling the need to have the answers and to figure it out. This is one of the not self themes of the open head, is really feeling this pressure to figure out everyone else's problems, to answer everyone else's questions. And you might feel like it's your job to do this, to have every possible answer, to be able to fix everyone's questions. But your head is not about figuring things out. Have I said that enough times yet? It's really about engaging with possibility, engaging with the universe, asking questions. So when you allow yourself to play with that and release yourself from the pressure of having to know the answer, that's where a lot of the magic comes from with this center. When you have this undefined or open, it's really easy for you to experience overwhelm, doubt, and confusion. And likely that's not even your own overwhelm, doubt, or confusion. You're receiving that and amplifying it because that's what open centers do. It's really essential for you to practice mindfulness in some capacity when you have the center open so that you can be the observer of your thoughts instead of getting wrapped up in them. Like I said, you're constantly taking in and amplifying the thoughts, ideas, and inspiration around you. And so it's very useful to witness that, to notice that without getting tied up in it. Also, a great activity for the head center is to play the what if up game because it's all about potential. And so what I mean by that is most of us play the what if down game. Not intentionally, we just tend to do this where it's like, what if this doesn't happen? What if this goes wrong? What if down, right? Like what if there's a problem? Instead of moving up in the energetic vibration, I suppose you could say. And so when you're looking to engage in possibility instead, what if up is like, what if this really amazing thing happens? What if I was walking down the street and I bumped into this new person and we became best friends? What if Beyonce came and knocked on my door? What if someone just gave me $1 million? What if this worked out better than I ever thought it possibly could? And it's this way to climb up and think about these amazing things that could happen and to really engage in the infinite field of potentials of asking questions, because the head works in asking questions. So it's like creating that stimulation for the universe, asking these questions that are good questions that you want these good answers to, in terms of expanding possibility instead of limiting possibility. Our open and undefined centers are meant for wisdom. So if you have the head center open, you're really here to be wise about inspiration and ideas. You have the potential to explore the mysteries of life and consciousness itself. You have an infinite range of intellectual possibilities, and you're really open to awe and wonder and ideas and inspiration and insights and new ways for humanity to evolve. And you can really discern who and what is confusing, or who and what is truly inspiring and has ideas that are worth moving forward with. Okay, so on to the second center. We are talking now about the mind, or the ajna center. The mind is a center for concrete thinking, data processing, opinions, beliefs, and analysis, not decision making. I talk about this in episode 3 on using your authority and why the mind is not meant for making decisions. So check that out if you haven't already. The mind center is really an interpreter or a transformer of the pressure and information that we receive from the head. It will work very hard to produce many options and guidance when making decisions, but you're not designed to listen to those. Your power lies in your authority, not listening to the mind. The mind can also be a source of fear and mental anxiety, especially if we feel like we don't know something or we're afraid of being misunderstood. And this can either drive us to understand and to learn more, which can be a positive outcome from this, or it can create more anxiety, which isn't ideal. If you have the mind defined in your chart, this is the place that information goes in and it just sticks there forever. Sometimes it's this unnecessary data that you wish you could declutter, but it just sticks. You generally also have a fairly fixed way of thinking and viewing the world. So I like to think of it's like you're viewing the world through a pair of colored glasses or a filter. And everything you see goes through this specific filter of how you view the world. And this isn't a bad thing, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you are closed-minded, but you have a specific way of filtering information in the world as it comes into your awareness. That being said, it can also be helpful for you to ask for the views and perspectives of other people around you from time to time, because you're generally not going to just naturally seek that out. When the center is defined, you also have the capacity for certainty. But just because you're certain about something doesn't mean that you're right or that your truth is the only truth. So it's something to be aware of. There's a tendency with this defined center to want to make mind-based decisions that are often followed by frustration or feelings of inadequacy when it's hard to follow through on decisions that the mind made as opposed to the authority. And again, I'm always going to turn this back to you, back to your authority, and back to what feels right for you as something for you to experiment with. When the center is defined, you are here to broadcast your beliefs, your thoughts, your answers, your opinions to the world around you. And your energy creates pressure in others to think and understand beliefs and to feel certain. So when you have the mind center open or undefined, you are wide open to ideas, beliefs, and concepts. And you have the ability to enjoy all aspects and potential wisdom to know which have real value. You're conditioned here to want certainty. The open mind tries to hold on to fixed ideas, beliefs, images, all of those things, but it has a hard time doing that. You are here to take in and amplify ideas, thoughts, concepts, beliefs. And so you really want to be mindful of the information you consume or the people that you're around, because you will take in and amplify those beliefs, thoughts, and ideas. You're also more likely to experience massive shifts in belief throughout your life. For example, if you grew up surrounded by specific beliefs where you took them in and you amplified them, and then you left home where you're exposed to new perspectives, you might completely change your beliefs. So for example, if you grew up in a household that was completely plant-based, vegan, eating animals was totally wrong, no one did it, and then you left and you moved to school, let's say, and you were around all these people who had different perspectives on diet and different beliefs on why we are meant to eat different ways, you might then take on their beliefs and amplify them and have a hard time understanding why you ever thought that your beliefs were good. And it's not correct or incorrect, but it's being aware of when your beliefs change. Did you change environments? Are you around new people? And your changing beliefs aren't a bad thing, but they can feel really confusing to you. And sometimes you feel a lot of pressure to be certain about your beliefs. And you're not designed to have certainty here. So it's really learning to let that go, to enjoy the open-mindedness, to enjoy your capacity to see things from different perspectives and to shift your beliefs when it feels like it's the right thing to do for you. When you have this center open or undefined, you have the capacity to be very wise about this energy. So you are wide open to ideas, beliefs, and concepts, and you can enjoy all aspects of potential wisdom to know which have real value. You also have a gift of being able to understand the varied perspectives that exist in our world. And when you can enjoy the perspectives without getting attached to them, you can access your highest level of wisdom and understanding. And I just want to go back to this for a minute, because one of the most important things to learn if you have this center open or undefined is to let go of your need for certainty. If you have a project or something that you're working on, but you're waiting until you're certain about it, that might never happen. And you might continue to do research and continue to do work to get this level of certainty, but it just might never actually be there. So when you can learn to build that trust with your strategy and authority, you can move forwards anyways without complete certainty. But you also don't have to present like you are fully certain about something. You know, this was a really big aha for me in my own life for so many reasons. When I grew up, my dad and my brother, they both have this center defined. And they know what they know, they are so certain, and they are very good at debating or arguing their points. And I would learn something new from someone else, and I'd be so excited about it, and I would go and I would share it with them. And they were like, well, what about this? And what about that? And did you think about this? And scientifically, like blah, 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 blah. And I would just be like, oh. And I would feel so stupid. And I know that that was never their intention. They just have such an analytical way of viewing things. And everything they take in goes through this one specific filter of theirs, where I'm this like little open thing that was just receiving all these things. And I would be excited about it without really fully analyzing or processing these things. Now, as I've grown up, I've learned to be a lot less gullible and to be a lot more aware of these ideas, that I don't have to take them in and amplify them so strongly. But I also know that I'm not stupid. I don't need to be opinionated. I don't need to have really strong views. And there is a gift in having this open perspective and seeing things from many different angles. Okay, so moving on to the throat center. This is the center for communication, manifestation, and expression. In human design, getting energy to the throat is the name of the game because it's our center for deliberate action and communication. The idea being that words really have the power to create, but we also need action. So it's not just about speaking things into existence, it's also about taking the right action at the right time. So communication and manifestation go hand in hand. There's also like this gearbox here that helps us to regulate our energy, and there's potential here because of that for burnout, especially if you're pushing and not following your strategy and authority. We'll talk more about the strategies in upcoming episodes about type, but it's something to be aware of. Our throat center is tied to our thyroid as well, and often when we're burnt out, our thyroid is really impacted by that. Again, I'm not a doctor, but it's just an interesting correlation to look at with human design. We tend to put a lot of pressure on ourselves to speak and act at the wrong time. When we learn to trust our strategy and authority and our right timing, things will be manifested and will be created in our lives a lot more easily, regardless of whether your throat is defined or not. And you will also be heard and understood best when you follow your strategy and authority as well. In my readings, something that often comes up is the wounds we have around our voice or being heard. We want to know if what we have to say is landing. Is it important? Are we being understood? Do you get me? Is what I'm saying, does it matter? I've done a lot of work on this myself, and still it comes up from time to time, like with creating this podcast. I'm like, is anyone going to care? Does this even matter? So it's really common for us to have sensitivities around our voice, and not necessarily of how our voice sounds, but what we have to say. Do we matter? Am I important? Almost everyone I speak to has had the experience of being really excited or wanting to share something, and they get it out and people are kind of just like, okay? Or worse, people judge them or make fun of them or laugh at them. And it sucks because you had this thing that you really wanted to share and it didn't land. It wasn't the right audience for your message. So again, going back to this idea of using our strategy and authority can help us to align our message with the right audience so that they can receive it in the right time. So when you have a defined throat, you are here to speak. That being said, just like I was talking about, and with everything in human design, it's important to use your strategy and authority to know when to speak and what to speak about so that you can be heard best. When you have the throat connected to a motor, so there's 4 motors in human design, but 3 can have direct connections to the throat: the sacral center, the emotional solar plexus center, or the heart center. There's sometimes an urge to be too impulsive and to talk too much or to do too much. Definitely something I've experienced in my life. So it can be helpful to have some awareness around that. You're also designed to speak and act based on what your throat is connected to. So if your throat center is connected to the mind, you're really here to speak about what you're thinking about, your analysis of things, how you conceptualize, and what you've learned. The heart center is very much about the I, what I want, what I have, what I do. You're meant to talk about yourself and to be selfish to a degree. If it's connected to the G center, you're here to talk about your identity at this soul level and about direction and love. If it's connected to the emotional solar plexus, you're really here to speak about your feelings and your emotions and your creativity. If it's connected to the spleen, it's about this intuitive knowing in the now and moment to moment, so sharing your intuition, potentially even speaking about health and instincts as well. And if it's connected to the sacral center, you're here to talk about what your sacral responds to. So often about work or about family, for example. You can also help undefined throats manifest by asking them lots of questions about what they're creating, the details of it, how they want to feel, what they're most excited about. So when you have it defined, it's like your energy can help their energy reach their throat. If you have an open or undefined throat center, you are here to be wise about communication and action. You can really vary your communication style to meet the needs of your audience, and because of this, can be a great communicator and use your voice in many different ways. So these can sometimes be great singers, speakers, and actors. A challenge of the open throat is the tendency to feel invisible or not heard. So the undefined throat can sometimes do inappropriate or out of character things in order to get attention or to be seen. Sometimes you can also feel out of control when you talk, or like nothing that you say makes sense, or you feel like you can't quite get the words out, or that you're being confusing, or that you don't really have any idea of what's going to come out of your mouth. So sometimes you don't want to open it because you're not sure what you're going to say. And there's a counterintuitive thing that happens here where you will be noticed more the less you succumb to the pressure to speak. And when you respond to an invitation to speak, or when you use your strategy and authority, you'll be heard a lot better. You're also not meant to force action or manifestations. No one is really. This can cause burnout. So again, trust your strategy and authority, take care of your energy and your thyroid. And I know I've said this a few times about being heard better if you wait and to trust in the silence. And I just want to be mindful because I don't want to silence anybody. And I never want to tell someone that you can't speak or you shouldn't speak. In fact, I want you to be heard better. This is all just an experiment. So if you have the experience that you're not being heard or what you're saying isn't landing, experiment with this and see what happens. For example, one of my clients, who generally is quite outspoken in her meetings at work, finds that she often isn't really heard well, or that her comments aren't well received. And so after experimenting with this of not speaking her mind and choosing to stay quiet, one of her leaders came to her after the meeting and sought out her opinions and asked for her thoughts on it. And so she had that one-on-one interaction where she was heard a lot better. So something for you to just experiment with and play around with. The wisdom of the open throat center is that you're really here to be wise about communication and manifestation. You can see when others are trying to force things to happen and when they're potentially risking their well-being to create an output or to be noticed or heard. You can also amplify the voices of those around you and speak or advocate for those who can't be heard or who aren't being heard. And you can have a deep understanding that listening is often more powerful than speaking. Our next center is the G center, or the self center, also called the identity center sometimes. And this is your center for identity, love, and direction. This is also where your magnetic monopole lives. If you've never heard that term before, it's essentially a one-ended magnet that attracts everything to you in your life. I'm pretty obsessed with this center. I love the attraction. I love that love energy that comes from it. And this center is also associated with our liver and reincarnation, which I think is kind of cool. If you have the G center defined, you're here to have a relatively fixed direction in life. And with everything in human design, I mentioned this, I think, in the first episode, we have to break apart human design in order to teach it. So if I'm saying that you have a relatively fixed life direction and you're like, I really don't, there might be other things in your design, like your gates or your channels or your incarnation cross or your profile, that create a lot less of a fixed direction for you. So this isn't a hard and fast rule, and this goes for pretty much everything because there's so many nuances. So here, obviously, I'm breaking things apart to teach it to you and to help you understand. So that being said, you are designed to have a general core identity of who you are, and you're not meant to take on or merge with someone else's direction. You're really here to stay on your own path in life, whatever that happens to be for you. Your desires and your direction are often going to be a little bit less varied, or they'll operate on a similar theme, and you have a sense of the correct direction for you in your life and can naturally help others find their direction as well, which is so nice. It's helpful to know that not everyone is designed to go the way that you're going. So each person needs to be allowed to have their own direction. Following your own path is essential to your happiness in your life, but it doesn't mean that someone else is going to be on the same path as you. So when it's time to part ways, be okay with that. One of the big things with this is that if you allow the expectations or opinions of others to take you from your own path, you can really end up disconnecting from yourself, from love, both from self-love and from love from the world around you. And if you have this center defined and you don't resonate with feeling secure in your lovability or your direction in life, it's often because you've let others take you off your own path. As you decondition your centers and follow your strategy and authority, you can really get back on the path that you're designed to be on, and that's in alignment for you. If you have the G center open, you're not designed to have a fixed identity, and that's 100% perfect for you. Your personality and your direction in life knows no limits or boundaries. The possibilities are honestly endless. And like with all the open centers, you take in and amplify energy here. So you take in and amplify the identities of people around you. Be mindful of which identities you're taking on. I find that this is the case for in person and also the case for TV and books and characters or people you follow on social media. So you want to be mindful about what you're consuming. I have this center undefined myself, and I've kind of made a rule that I don't consume things that are angry or suspenseful or traumatic or upsetting. And, it's not that I'm not informed about anything, but I don't choose that for my entertainment. If I want to entertain myself, I don't choose things that are going to make me feel stressed or like super dramatic or whatever. I choose things that are going to make me feel good. Because of this capacity to take in and amplify other people's identities, I find this center can often be confused with empathy. And I really think it's another layer of empathy because you're not just experiencing someone's emotions, you're experiencing someone else's identity. Their entire experience, their joys, their wounds, their pains, their energy, all of it. Some of this is really beautiful because you can sense someone's potential as well. It's so easy for you to fall in love with anyone and everyone's potential. This is great for you to be able to hold space for others as they grow into this version of themselves, but it can also be tricky because sometimes people aren't going to do that. And it's not your job to make them do that either. So you want to be mindful that you're in relationships, whether it's romantic or friendships or business partnerships, with the people as they are. Hold space for them to grow, but be honest with who they are now and that you're okay with that as well. One of the challenges with this center or the not self aspect, is the tendency to question your lovability and direction and to try and force an identity where you think that you need to be a specific way, to dress a specific way, to act a specific way, when really you're designed to be fluid and changing. One last thing I'll mention about this is that your physical environment, including your geography, massively affects you. You want to have an environment that feels good to you as much as possible. And you might even consider looking into astrocartography or feng shui, for example, if things feel off. And those might be full episodes for the future. So if you know people who do those things, send me a DM, let me know. The wisdom of the open or the undefined G center is that you are here to take in love in so many different forms and to deeply understand love. You also have a strong ability to help others see their lovability and direction. You can help people to understand what they're here for, what they're passionate about in life, and you can know if the places for you or other people in terms of geography and environment are correct for them and their needs. The undefined G center often wants to find themselves, but there really is no self to find. You have a fluid sense of identity, and that's beautiful. My friend told me a story about this cool person that she knew. I think they worked in marketing together, and she started off making jewelry just as like a random hobby. And because she designed jewelry, she eventually learned how to draw, so she could, like sketch out what she was going to make. And from that drawing, she eventually got into designing textiles, and then from there became an incredible wallpaper designer. And there's definitely a similar theme there in terms of like creativity, but this idea that you don't need to know what the end game is, especially when you have the center open. It's just allowing the next piece to unfold. Honestly, I really believe for all of us, it's just always about allowing and allowing and allowing for the next piece to unfold and the next piece to unfold. But I think that's a cool example of how she just followed what felt good for her and landed doing something that she really loved. Okay, so the next center is the heart center. This is the little triangle to the right of the G center. This is also sometimes called the will center or the ego center. It is one of our motors, and it is the center for willpower, ego, and things that have value, which includes material things as well as money. A big theme of the will center is that we can endure or hold on through whatever needs to happen for the greater good of the whole. There's a lot of tribal energy in the will center, and so it often uses that will energy for the tribe, for the greater good of the whole. Another theme in terms of ego is that you are just one piece in the puzzle of humanity, and your ego is really here to get you to be the very best piece that you can be so that you can serve the greatest good. So it's not about competition with other people, but it's about being your highest self or the best version of yourself. Before I get into it, I'll also say that this is the center I find people can relate to the least sometimes when they have it defined, because our society has really conditioned us to equate our value to something outside of ourselves, whether it's our productivity, our results, our money, and doing. And so often a lot of people with a defined heart center relate to the undefined heart center in terms of feeling like they're not enough or that they're not worthy or they have to prove their value. And I really think that just speaks to where we're at culturally right now. So the defined heart center. From a human design perspective, you are in the minority that actually has willpower, even if you don't think that you do. Willpower in this context is not about sticking to a routine or waking up every day at 5 a.m. It's really about enduring for the greater good of the whole. When I first learned this in human design, I was like, willpower? I don't think I have willpower. And then when I got to understand that it's more about enduring for the tribe, I was like, oh. So when I think back to when I was married and in a job that I hated, I endured that for years because I believed that it was best for my quote unquote tribe, for my little family. And it wasn't until a so-called tribal agreement was broken that I left and I no longer had that willpower to continue and to endure that. So it's an interesting way of looking at willpower. Generally, the defined heart is quite happy to use their willpower to provide for the tribe, and they also want to be appreciated for it. You are here to empower others. A lot of people in the personal development industry have this center defined because it's a very empowering energy, although it's something to be mindful of because the will center can have a lot of power to it for short periods of time, and it can place unrealistic expectations on undefined will centers or heart centers and try to push them beyond their capacity. If you have the center defined, you like being in control of yourself and your resources, whether it's your style or your workplace or how your time is spent, and because of this, defined heart centers often prefer to be their own boss so that they can follow their own instincts around when to work and when to rest, or they at least like flexibility when it comes to that. It's also pretty easy for the defined center to push and to take sort of incorrect action or push through things that don't feel right. And it's easy for them to get carried away and just forget to take breaks. One of the things I've learned for defined will centers is that they need to take 2 days off a week to actually rest, like real rest, not fake rest, okay? The defined will center is really good at fake rest, meaning that they're like, yeah, I took 3 days off this week. And they like cleaned out their entire garage, they painted their whole room, they meal prepped for the next month, they whatever. But it's like they do all these things. They read personal development books, they go to business conferences, and because it wasn't their money earning work or whatever, they think that it's not work when it's not real rest. So it's crucial when you have this to learn what will resource you, to learn what fuels you up again, and to give yourself time to actually rest. And if 2 days off a week sounds like it's just impossible for you, I get it. I've definitely been there. Start with just one day, or start with at least understanding what actually refuels you and start experimenting with what creates that experience of rest and resourcing yourself so you have that energy to go back to. A funny thing that can happen with this center is that sometimes people think you've promised or agreed to things when you haven't. So you want to be very clear in your communication. In the high expression of this center, you have no problems making and keeping your promises. It's really important with this center that you do what you say you will. It strengthens your self-esteem. The open heart or undefined heart is here to be wise about what is truly valuable in life. The biggest challenge usually for the will center is questioning their own value and feeling like they have to prove something or that they're trying to prove their worth. They can really get into a negative self-esteem spiral of trying to prove their worth by promising beyond their capacity, failing to fulfill their promises, and then repeating this cycle. There's definitely a tendency to try and overachieve to compensate for this fear of lack or this fear of not being enough. And there's also a tendency to undervalue your work or services, which can really, all of this lead to feeling unworthy of love, money, happiness, all of these things. So you want to check in with your motivation with this center. Are you doing things to prove something to others? Are you doing something to show that you're worthy, to show that you're valuable? Remind yourself always that you have nothing to prove. You are worthy. We all are. And check back in with your strategy and authority to see if this is something that's really aligned that feels good for you. This center, when it's open or undefined, can also amplify the willpower of defined heart centers for short periods of time. So when someone else has this willpower and you're around them, you can take in that energy and make it bigger and push even harder for a short period of time, but it's not sustainable for you. It's not sustainable for anyone, really. And you have to make sure that when you're out of that energy, you really take the time to rest. The wisdom of the open heart is that you're here to be wise about worthiness and what's valuable in life. You're able to sense others' self-esteem and their sense of worthiness. You can understand who is overcompensating and who can actually deliver on the promises that they've made. You're clear that you're not here to compete with anyone. You're strong in your foundation of inherent worthiness and don't feel the need to prove your value. And you know that you're worthy of money just by being, not through hard work. Another thing I like to note with this center is that rest and worthiness are wrongly associated. Especially in our Western society, we have this thing about being productive, that being productive is better and resting is bad or lazy. That's really not the case. You need to rest. I was talking about this with my HG school students this past week, and they helped me flesh out this analogy. So thanks, Vivian. If you imagine being on a road trip, you think it's productive to drive and move in the direction that you're trying to go. And this is true. But when you are out of gas, and preferably before you run out of gas, you stop and get gas and you refuel so that you can then continue to drive. We get this when it comes to cars or vehicles, but we seem to forget this with ourselves, likely because it takes longer for us to refuel than just pulling into a gas station and filling up our tank because we're not machines. This center, when it's pushing, instead of stopping to refuel because it wants to be productive, it wants to keep moving, it gets out of the car and just keeps pushing the car because it thinks it's being productive. We can see how ridiculous that is. Just stop and refuel. And once you've rested sufficiently, a big key there, sufficiently, then you would go. You wouldn't just put 3 gallons of gas in the tank and expect to continue driving. No, you have to fill up the tank. Same goes for you. Fill up, refuel, resource, not the bare minimum, not enough just to get to the next gas station, but actually rest. And in that sense, resting, refueling is just as productive. This input, this ability to learn to nourish ourselves is productive. We also don't have to be productive all the time, but that's a whole other conversation. One last note on this center and proving your worth. The heart center represents the stomach as well as other organs in human design, and many digestive issues are said to be tied to low self-esteem and low self-worth. When we're overachieving and making promises that we can't keep and pushing beyond our capacity, these are all signs that we're trying to prove our worth at the expense of our well-being. Integrity is also connected to self-esteem when we look at it this way. When you only agree to what you will actually do and follow through on that, you have integrity and you increase your self-esteem. The opposite degrades it. So when I work with people that are struggling with self-esteem, one of the first things I tell them to do is to stop saying you're going to do things And it doesn't matter what the things are, even if it's just like, oh yeah, I'm going to clean out this closet this weekend. Oh yeah, I'm going to do this. If you're not going to do it, don't say that you are, especially if you've been saying that you're going to do this for like 2 months or 2 years now. Clearly, it's not a priority for you, and that's okay. But be in integrity with yourself, with your word, with all of the things, and that really can help your self-esteem and your feelings of worthiness as well. Also, a reminder that you have nothing to prove to anyone. We are valuable, period. We have value, period. Okay, that's it. Let's move on to the next center. We are past the halfway mark onto the emotional solar plexus. This is the triangle on the right side, and this is the center for emotions, desire, passion, and spirit. Some themes of our emotional solar plexus are that our emotional wellness affects our physical wellness, that we are meant to move towards pleasure and towards what feels good, and about 50% of us have emotional definition, and the other 50% take in and amplify emotions. So there's a lot of movement of emotional energy around. If you have this center defined, it automatically is your authority, and so you are meant to make decisions over time and not spontaneously. It means that you have an emotional wave, and your emotions are meant to go up and down, and you're really meant to wait out for big decisions to come to a place of clarity. I have a whole podcast episode on this coming out on Thursday, all about the emotional authority, diving deeper into it. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this today. But the idea that you're meant to be even and happy all the time is not based in reality. There's nothing wrong with you if you aren't. You're designed to have highs and lows. You also broadcast your emotions to those around you, so pay attention to what you're broadcasting. And I don't mean this in like a guilting or shaming way that you can't ever feel bad or anything like that, but it's just something to be mindful of. If your emotional solar plexus is open or undefined, you are a true empath. You take in and you amplify the emotions of those around you, and there's a lot around you. Like I said, we're split about 50-50. If you imagine that emotions are like water, when you have this open and you are unaware, you can absorb the emotions of others like a sponge and you really take them on. So ideally, we want the emotions to pass through you like water would pass through a strainer. You can feel the emotions or the water passing through you, but you're not holding on to them. One of the big challenges with this center or not self tendencies is to avoid confrontation so that you don't experience the emotions of other people. You may have a tendency to people please if you have this center open because you feel others' feelings so deeply. You try to manage their emotions and just people please so that you don't have to experience their sadness or disappointment or anger. And it's not your job to manage anyone's emotions except your own. So notice if you're holding back on your own truth and trying to manage the emotions of people around you. Another way that this can play out is that you might actually create drama in your life and like stir the pot a little bit, poke the bear. Especially if you grew up around a lot of emotional energy, because when that energy isn't there, you can feel bored or sort of empty. So you like to shake things up a little. I find this happens a lot less, but it does still happen sometimes. If you have this center open and you're experiencing really strong emotions around someone, it can be helpful for both of you to just take some space. Give yourself 15 minutes, get away. If you're in a relationship or a partnership, let's say, and things are getting kind of heated, it can be like, okay, listen, I love you. I'm feeling like things are getting a little bit heated and I don't think I can have a clear conversation about something in this type of energy. I'm going to go for a walk. I'll be back in 15 minutes and we can talk about it then. And just giving yourself at least 15 minutes to get out of that energy, to get out of that aura can be really helpful to bring that energy back down. Energy clearing practices are important for everyone, but especially when you have an open solar plexus, to let go of the emotions that aren't yours. And if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, Katie, I am so emotional. What are you talking about? Like I said, with all open and undefined centers, you take in energy and amplify it. So it might actually seem like you are more emotional than the emotionally defined people in your life. But generally, when you don't have anyone around you and you've let the emotional energy subside, you're pretty even and cool and chill most of the time. Some of the wisdom that the open or undefined emotional solar plexus has is that you are here to be truly empathic. You can see and understand emotional wellness in others. You're able to see and reflect the emotions of others back to them when they may not be allowing themselves to fully feel their own emotions, and you're truly unlimited in the emotions that you can experience from other people. Some reminders for all of us, defined or not: there is nothing wrong with you for feeling your emotions. There is nothing wrong with you for having ups and downs. There is nothing wrong with you for not feeling happy all the time. There is nothing wrong with you if you have trouble identifying your emotions. emotions. There's nothing wrong with you if you have trouble expressing your emotions. You are not too sensitive. You are not too emotional. Emotions are powerful and beautiful. It's just about learning how to use them. And again, I'll have an episode all about the emotional solar plexus on Thursday. Okay, so let's move on to the spleen. This is the triangle on the left side. It's an awareness center, and it really is your center for instinct, health, intuition, and survival. The spleen is also very time specific. So if you think about your instincts, if there's something that's dangerous, it's immediate. You run, you fight, you flight, you freeze, you fawn, whatever all those things are. You don't spend time riding the wave like you would with your emotions. It's instant and it's immediate. When you have a defined spleen, you are meant to be spontaneous, you are also highly intuitive, and you can tap into those instincts, which is how you can rely on that spontaneity. I will make a caveat though, if you have a defined spleen and you also have the emotional solar plexus defined, you are not meant to be spontaneous. You are meant to use the emotional solar plexus as your authority. But that being said, you still want to pay attention to your senses, especially if something is telling you that it's dangerous, because you're still going to use that splenic intuition in the moment on the rare occasion. So you really want to get to know how your spleen speaks to you, how your senses speak to you, how you hear your intuition. Maybe it's through actually hearing. Maybe you hear words. Maybe you just get a feeling, or maybe you smell something or get like a bad taste in your mouth even. The defined spleen can also light up a room because the spleen has this like radiating good feeling that comes with it. You generally have a strong immune system if you have a defined spleen. So if you're sick all the time, it's often because you're ignoring your senses. And sometimes defined spleens actually have a tendency to get really sick because you ignore the first 17 signs that something is off and don't see a doctor until it's bad. I have been very guilty of this in the past, like when I ignored a bladder infection for 2.5 years and ended up hospitalized for a severe kidney infection. And I also had a cold that turned into a sinus infection that ruptured both of my eardrums, and I was deaf for a month. I have more stories, but I won't go into them. So the idea being, pay attention to your senses. Your body's knowing is here to guide you and protect you. If you consistently let your mind override the knowing of the spleen, you become out of touch with your natural instincts and your intuition, which can put you at risk for health issues, unhappiness, and just general sort of suffering. Wrong environments can also lead to sickness and low energy for defined spleens. So again, paying attention to your senses. One of the challenges of the defined spleen is being on high alert. Your instincts are always on, and that's how we really survived as humans, but it's knowing the difference of when you can relax, when you're safe, when you don't need to be on high alert all the time. The defined spleen is also said to have a good connection to time. And I believe it has a good connection for timing as opposed to clock time. So it knows when it's time to do something. It knows when it's time to leave something. It knows when it's time to start something, not specifically what time of day it is. And you might, but I believe it's more timing as opposed to time. So now the open spleen. It has a very fluid connection to the time-space continuum, meaning that they often struggle to be on time, and they might know that they struggle to be on time, so they're hypervigilant and overcompensate, or they might be people that are just always late. They're very intuitive, but they often don't trust their intuition because it's open. They're constantly taking in and amplifying it in different sources, so their intuition often comes to them in many different ways. If you have an open spleen and you're spending a lot of time around people who are sick, you want to be mindful of clearing out that energy and not taking on their symptoms. A challenge of the open spleen, or the not self theme, is holding on to things for too long or holding on to things that are no longer good for you. So there's often this tendency of something that used to feel good and used to work for you. So it's like you want that to still feel good. So you hold on to people, relationships, places, jobs way past expiry. You will often have a more sensitive immune system. And I am not a doctor. This is not medical advice. But if it's something that you feel called to, it might be interesting for you to look into more alternative methods of healing as opposed to just blasting your system with Western medicine. And believe me, Western medicine has saved my life more than once, so I am very grateful for it. But when someone has an open spleen, it might be interesting to look into other types of medicine as well. The gates of the spleen all have specific fears associated with them. I have an Instagram post about the spleen center, so either scroll back in my Instagram or I will link in the show notes that say which fear is associated with which gate. Whether you have them open or not, you can amplify the energy of the fears and you can really get stuck in this fear. Get to know them and know that the only way out of fear is through. When you recognize that and can listen to your strategy and authority, things tend to move a lot more easily. The wisdom of the open spleen is that you can really understand the difference of what you need to take care of your own well-being versus the well-being of the environment around them that also needs tending to. There's wisdom here around intuition, how it works, who has access to their intuition and various forms of intuition, and it's really great energy for healers because you can feel what's out of balance in others. And providing that you're not identifying with their health problems, you can help them to heal or understand what environment they need for healing. Okay, on to the sacral. This is the most sustainable motor that we have. It is all about life force energy, work, and everything that's associated with sex and sexuality, including childbearing, raising children, being able to procure the resources and make sure that children have what they need until they're old enough to go off and survive on their own. It's the energy for work, but more importantly, work through responding. And when I say work, I mean using your energy. I don't necessarily mean like a 9 to 5. It's any way that you respond to using your energy. 70% of the population has this center defined. So if you're one of them, you've been gifted with a massive amount of power and energy. And if you don't feel like that's the truth, I have a post on generator burnout. So whether you're a generator or a manifesting generator, I'll link it in the show notes if you want to give that a read. You are really here to find satisfaction through using up the energy in your sacral every day by doing the work that lights you up. The power from your sacral turns on when you respond to something in the world outside of yourself and not just ideas in your head. You are meant to honor your truth, to listen to that sacral guidance. And if your sacral says no to something and you commit to the situation anyways, this can wear away your energy and your capacity over time and creates massive frustration in your life. It can also be difficult for you to follow through with commitments that you responded no to, but decided to do anyways, and that can make you feel flaky versus when your sacral responds yes, you have a lot more energy to follow through. It's also important for you to use up your energy and go to bed when you're tired. If you push past that and have a second wind, you've likely pushed too far, and then it's kind of tricky to actually get the rest that you need in order to regenerate the sacral energy for the next day. 30% of us have the sacral center open. So if you have this open, you're in the minority, and sometimes you are left feeling like you are lazy or there's something wrong with you. And there is nothing wrong with you. Your energy just works differently than the majority of people. That being said, when you have the center open, you can take in and amplify energy here. So sometimes people often feel like they have this superhuman energy for a little while, but it's not sustainable and it's not something that you can rely on for long periods of time. The challenge here, or not self-theme, is not knowing when enough is enough. And I often say it's like the low fuel light on your car is so faint that you don't realize when it goes off, so it's very easy to ignore it and just keep driving. Often when people with a center get into their 30s, mid-30s is when they start to notice a crash with being able to access this energy. And there is a theme with the open sacral, like I said, of not knowing when enough is enough, which can lead to burnout and exhaustion, and it's not fun. So learning for yourself when you actually need to rest, when you need to take a break, is going to be so important for your health, your happiness, your success, everything, because it's difficult for you to use your strategy and authority effectively when you're exhausted. So start paying attention. When is enough enough? When have you watched enough episodes on Netflix? When have you scrolled through enough posts on Instagram? When have you worked enough hours or spent enough hours in front of your laptop? Start to notice the beginning signs and create boundaries there. And listen, often those beginning signs come way earlier than you want them to, but it's learning to respect your boundaries. I often talk about taking open sacral naps where I'll have a lie down for 20 minutes and no phone. I just set a timer. I don't usually fall asleep. Sometimes I will, but rarely. I just lie down. And getting horizontal can really help your sacral to regenerate itself. And I find usually by minute 17, I'm like, okay, cool, I'm ready to go again. And it has been so helpful for me to really extend the life of my energy, especially on days when I need to do more. You will also amplify the energy for sex and sexuality. So depending on what partner you're with, you will amplify the energy if they have a defined sacral. So your experiences with this part of your life can often vary drastically from partner to partner because the energy is theirs. You're taking it in, you're amplifying it instead of bringing your own energy in this way. Traditional human design sometimes teaches that you're not meant to have children if you have this center open. I completely disagree with that. Although I don't have children of my own, something that you might want to be mindful of is that you might need more support when you're raising children because you don't have that same level of sustainable energy. And so it might be really helpful to look at getting support from family, from neighbors, from schools, from whatever you need in order to take really good care of yourself and your family as well. And I also believe that we all need more support than most of us have right now, especially when it comes to raising children. I don't think we're meant to do this alone. So I'm celebrating all of you parents out there and the work that you do. Give yourself grace and compassion wherever your energy level is at. Open sacrals are also designed to not work in the traditional way. Again, arguably, none of us are designed to work 40-hour work weeks, but here we are. Anyways, it's important to work in cycles of work and rest. The wisdom of the open sacral is really about being wise about boundaries, work, and rest. You can truly know that money and success don't have to come from working the hardest. We are designed to be supported. And you also have the capacity for wisdom to listen to your body and respect your flow of energy that works in these kind of like spurts and stops and needs plenty of rest. Okay, we finally made it to the last center, the root center. It is the center for adrenaline pressure, drive, and stress. It is also a motor and a pressure center. So the root tells us that stress is just fuel. It's meant to move us forwards when it's used correctly. But when we don't understand the pressure, we often push ourselves too hard. And when we turn the pressure inwards, it's something that can also cause depression. But a healthy balance of stress actually brings us joy. So if you have the root defined, it's like a regulator in human design that pulses energy on and off. And the pulse tells you when things feel right and it's time to act, and it can make it really tricky in a world where we're expected to be on all the time. The root has a fixed way of dealing with the pressure to move forward. It has a fixed way of dealing with stress. So you often deal with pressure and stress fairly well when you have the center defined. But when the pressure that you usually know how to work with becomes too much, or when you're not using your strategy and authority, or when you're forcing, you can become obsessive about things. You can, like I said, become depressed. There's also a tendency here to project excess stress onto other people, which often looks like having unrealistic expectations of them. So use your strategy and authority. When you do that, you can really excel with the right pressure, challenge, and stress. And when you have an undefined root, this is a center that is under pressure. And the challenge or the not self theme of the open root is that you want to hurry up and get things done so you can rest. You take in and amplify adrenaline and pressure. And pressure is quite uncomfortable for you when you have this open. So you're always in a hurry to get everything off your to-do list, to get everything done so you can finally relax. But this whole get everything done so you can relax, it doesn't work. The to-do list never ends. So you can push yourself and push yourself and push yourself until burnout, unless you learn to create your own boundaries. You may also have a tendency to rush through tasks and finish things and not really do your best work sometimes because you just want to be done. These people can also be addicted to adrenaline and pressure and stress, and can be either addicted to or very sensitive to caffeine. The open roots are really here to be wise about rest. You can be wise about boundaries and relaxation and free time, and knowing that you don't need to hustle or always be busy to be successful or joyful. You can also be wise about the energy of pressure and when it's being used effectively and when it's not. I thought there was kind of a fun example of this of when I went on vacation last with my partner. He has a defined route and I have an open route. And so when we were on vacation, as soon as we got there, I was like, done, off. It was a 2-week vacation, and we went in with this idea of like, we're going to take the first week off and the second week we'll work while we're there. And I barely worked the second week because I was just like, no, this is so clearly time to just like relax, to be off. And he had a pretty hard time. Like it took him a couple days before he could really unwind and relax. But for me, it's like as soon as I landed on that beach, it was done, off. I can do this rest and relaxation so well. The root dynamic is also one of the biggest center dynamics to understand in relationships. So if you are in any kind of relationship, which I assert you have relationships with someone in your life, and someone has a defined root and someone else has an open or undefined root, the defined root exerts pressure on the open root. The open root receives pressure. So it plays out kind of like this. The defined root will be like, hey, what do you want to have for dinner? And the open root's like, oh my God, why do I always have to decide what's for dinner? Don't you know that I have a job? I have things to do too. I can't just like be planning a 7-course dinner every single night. And the defined root is like, what? I was just asking what you wanted for dinner. Like, I'll go get it or make it or pick it up. Like, it's just a question. I've also noticed a similar dynamic with my mom. She's the sweetest person, but especially in the early days of my business, she has a defined route. I have an open route. And she would be like, hey, Kate, like, how are things going with your business? And in my head, I'd be like, oh my gosh, Mom, like, don't you realize these things take time and I'm just not going to be super successful overnight? And I mean, she's just curious, she just wants to be a part of my life. She wasn't trying to put pressure on me at all. But the open route often receives pressure. So if you have the open route, or if you notice this pattern in your life or in your relationships, it can be really helpful to check in, to be like, hey, what's going on here? Like, I said this and you seemed to be upset by it or angry by it. What do you think I said? Or what do you think was implied? Or like, what are you actually feeling? And kind of check in there, because it's a lot easier for me now when I know that the pressure is sort of my own doing. It's like, I don't need to react that way because I know that the pressure isn't intended. So something to be mindful of around the root center. Okay, that was a lengthy one today. I have so much to say on the centers. I think this section in HD School, which is my online course that teaches human design, is like 7 or 9 hours long, something like that. So there's a lot to learn here, but I hope you got a taste for the energy centers. Like I mentioned, I created a cheat sheet for you, so check it out at sortofspiritual.com/centers so you can easily reference what I've just shared. And that's it. So that's all of the centers. I hope you learned something new. I would so appreciate it if you would share this with a friend if they're also into human design. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you so much. I hope you learned something useful about yourself and how you operate. And I can't wait for you to hear the next episode on emotional authority. Whether it is defined in your chart or not, it's so helpful to understand this energy better. I think it's crucial as part of our evolution of humanity. So that is coming for you on Thursday. I'm sending you so much love. Until next time.